City Council acting as the Budget Audit Committee on March 9th, 2021 at 1:30 p.m. Joining me online today are Councilmember Hector Shabito, Councilmember Andrea Bearfield, Councilmember Kelly Palmer, and Councilmember Jim Holmes. I don't see Josh on this call. Oh, and Councilmember Josh Border. Good to see you, Josh. Everybody else? On March 16, 2020, the governor suspended various provisions of the Open Meetings Act pursuant to a state of disaster authority. This change was effective March 16, 2020 until further notice or until the state of disaster declaration expires. In accordance with physical distancing guidelines and while providing for as much transparency as possible, this meeting is not going to be open to the public to attend in person. This meeting is available live via a Zoom Gov webinar. Video and audio recordings will be available to the public. According to the governor and attorney general, statutes that may require face-to-face interaction between members of the public and public officials are suspended, provided, however, that the governmental body offers alternative methods of communications with their public officials. This includes public comment on agenda items. In an effort to allow for as much public input as possible, those who wish to submit their written comments or speak on a listed agenda item were asked to submit their comments to the city secretary's office by 11 a.m. today. Esmeralda, are there any registered speakers?
No, Mayor and Council, there are not. And I'd also like to note for the record, Councilmember Bearfield has joined us as well.
Great. Oh, sorry, did I skip it?
No.
Great to see Councilmember Bearfield. All right, we'll now move for the approval of the minutes. Are there any changes to the minutes from our February 9th meeting? Those will stand as approved. And now we will move to our discussion. I think Paul Kane is going to lead out on the discussion of proposed first quarter fiscal year 2021 budget amendments and general fund reserves, assignments, and fund balance.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Thank you for joining us today and taking the time to meet with us. We got some good information to share with you today. And first up on our agenda is discussion, as the Mayor said, discussion of our proposed first quarter fiscal year budget adjustments, and Budget Manager Paul Diaz will take us through those. And then Part B of Item 1 will be general fund reserves, assignments, and fund balance discussion. And Director of Finance Janice Andrews will take us through those. So, Paul.
Thank you, sir. Let me share my screen with you all. Can you all see that properly?
Not yet.
What about now?
Still no.
No.
1 second, I apologize.
Huzzah.
Good.
There we go.
All right, sorry about that, y'all. Good afternoon, my name is Paul Diaz. I have the privilege to serve as the budget manager for the city. And today, my part is to discuss the proposed first quarter budget amendments. Now, the budget office brings forward two types of amendments. The first is kind of routine in nature, administrative in nature. And then the second are new items or changes or adjustments to our planned fiscal year. This budget amendment actually brings forward both types. So let's begin with the routine budget amendment. As part of the CAFR process, the year-end process, finance along with purchasing meet with all of the departments to vet which purchase orders in the current year need to be closed and which need to roll forward. The carried over or rolled forward purchase orders are automatically updated and put into the next fiscal year as part of our financial system called Munis. Because the total appropriation in the funds have increased, we need to bring that back to council for approval. This is a routine process that happens every year about this time once we close the last fiscal year. To the right, you can see the amounts of the open POs that we're rolling forward. And looking back at last year's, the same amounts were pretty close to what we brought forward when we closed FY 2019. The next few slides here, we'll talk about some of the new or adjustments that we're hoping to bring forward. And the first one that we're hoping to bring forward is an actual reduction in our expenses. As you may recall, as part of the FY21 budget development, the city manager stated that he would like to do a merit raise for our employees if sales tax, rebounded strongly following the pandemic, or staff was able to find savings in operations. So the city manager directed the budget team to work with the departments, the operating departments, to identify expenditure savings to offset portions of this increase for pay raises. That work yielded about $1.5 million worth of savings, and it accomplishes the city manager's directive, and it has enabled the city management team to proceed with the pay raises. Those pay raises actually take effect this month. So really good news there. And I always say that budget is a team sport. And as these graphs here show, many departments came together to make this a reality of holding on their budget and some line items and really digging in to our expenses. The good thing about this strategy of culving back on the expenses is that this preserves the city's ability to recognize more sales tax revenue if certain opportunities arrive in the fiscal year. As you're aware, we took a conservative approach when budgeting sales tax, and year to date, our current collections are up almost 20% from where we're at relative to budget. So we still do have that ability to recognize additional revenue if an opportunity comes up. Some of the other adjustments and new items that we want to bring forward, as I stated, was the reduction in expense. We want to use this to repurpose for some of these other amendments. The first amendment that we'd like to repurpose for is for $290,000 for radio replacement in emergency management. We'd also propose to transfer out $250,000 to a cash CIP fund for ADA improvements as we continue that work throughout the city. The next proposed transfer is a transfer out for $440,000 to the new stormwater utility. This is for personnel and startup costs, and it's part of the updated agenda. There was some additional information about our plans for that. And then the last big item that we have on the on the amendment side is for IT projects. As you're aware, we've got some big goals in IT, and we are requesting for funding in the general fund to go up $661,000 for critical IT projects. Now, this full amount will be budgeted in the general fund, but it won't be fully supported by the general fund as other funds are helping out to send over transfers. And we're also getting $104,000 from our partners at the county to help pay for some of for the Luminaire health contract, that second one. As part of your agenda packet, we had staff put together a business case and an overview of all of these purchases, yeah, so a total of 661 with the net effect in the general fund of about 250,000. We have a couple of more smaller amendments that we wanted to bring forward. One was for the Cooper Foundation grant. This was a grant that was actually received in FY 2020. But it was neither encumbered or spent in FY 20. So what happened was that fell to fund balance. We need to capture that, amend it, recognize the revenue, recognize the expense so that we can move forward for necessary fund, housing, and homeless studies. Additionally, in the general fund, there is some assignment of funds that we would need to get direction on. That is actually coming up next with Ms. Andrews' presentation and to get council direction on that. And then the last amendment that we're bringing forward is a staff amendment to amend the CIP so it matches our debt sale. As you are all aware, this is maybe more for the audience, but over the last 3 months, we discussed with both council and budget and audit about our upcoming debt sale in November and December. It was ultimately approved on February 2nd. We need to amend the budget so it matches what we've talked about in terms of the debt that we're selling. At a summary view, here's what we have. The first lighter blue column shows our rolled operational POs totaling $5.4 million across those funds. And then we have the darker blue, which are the operational amendments, showing the operation savings of $5.4 million, as well as radio replacement, the Cooper grant, the ADA. And then the last few you'll see the transfers in and transfers out from the general fund and from other funds for things like the startup costs for the stormwater, as well as the critical software projects in IT. Here's a view of the summary of amendments that we'll have to make for the general capital projects to match up what we did within the debt sale. And with that, Mayor and Council, I'll be happy to answer any questions you all may have about the proposed bond amendment. This amendment will be coming to the council at the next meeting on the 16th.
Hey,
Thanks,
Paul, this is,
Any questions
Oh.
for Paul?
sorry, Mayor. Paul, this is Kelly Palmer. I have a couple of questions for you. On the first slide, there was the 32% reduction in maintenance. And I'm wondering what sort of maintenance costs we've incurred as a city as a result of the storm. And if we are like, how are any of these dynamics affected by costs that we incurred as a result of the storm, and how does that play into this equation?
Yeah, so this work was actually done earlier in the fiscal year in the November and December timeframe. Obviously, as part of our mission, every month we run financials to make sure that unexpected events like an ice storm will not affect our overall amount or our overall budgets, and that will be good. We're still processing invoices and looking at that, and we really won't have a full understanding of all of those expenses until we close the fiscal month, and then we can report back on that. But that's definitely something that we're monitoring in our shop, the impact of the storms.
Okay, thank you. And the other question I have is for the Cooper Foundation grant, what was the intended purpose of that grant that we received?
I'm going to defer to Janice Andrews on that one. That was a little bit before my time, and I know she has a healthier understanding of that particular project.
That was actually a grant that we got in advance for homeless studies, and
Okay.
The PO was not set up during the year, so we actually had to set the revenue aside to be able to use it in fiscal year 21.
Okay, so it will still be going to that same intended purpose, just a delayed timeline.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
On that note, how does that connect? I know that in our report that council members got over the weekend, the homelessness study that we were examining doing was having some fiscal constraints on or I guess the RFPs came back a little more expensive than we thought. Was that going to be funded with general fund dollars or with this Cooper Foundation grant? And could we utilize that for that purpose? I might be getting over my skis by asking this question, but
the Cooper Foundation grant was actually to fund two different studies, a housing study and a homelessness study. We're committed to both studies. Obviously, we have had some difficulty on the homelessness study. I think Galen or Deidre can correct if I'm wrong, but we've actually gone out a couple of times for RFP on that study, and we'd be glad to provide a fuller update to the council on how to get that work accomplished. But we do fully intend to use the Cooper Foundation grant and possibly some other resources locally for it. I'd invite Deidre to add any value there if I didn't cover something she wanted to cover.
No, that's correct. We're also looking at the strategy in which and how we approach the homelessness study, just because of the size of our community and some of the concerns we believe are attributed to why we've only received the low number of responses to our RFP.
Hey, Paul, thank you so much for the presentation. Well, first of all, I want to say kudos, City Manager Ford, kudos to your department heads for being able to reduce expenses by $1.5 million. I mean, in the world today, that's very rare. And so kudos to you and your departments to be able to accomplish that. And then the second, a special kudos to Public Works and Police departments who, just between the two of the departments, make up over 40% of the savings. So, I mean, even that we are still moving forward with our projects in Public Works and Police is still very important for us to be able to really just see that type of savings. I think that is phenomenal. So congratulations. Paul, have a question for you. In the list of IT projects, proposed IT projects for the $660K, does that include, or can it include, or is there room to a new city website?
Yeah, so The second from the last has the website content
Okay.
management system.
Okay. So that does include a new website for perfect. Thank you for that. I know we have expressed interest in updating and really renewing our website and how it looks and make it more user friendly. So I'm glad to see that that's in the pipeline. So thank you so much.
Council members, as y'all have extra time, we did outline each one of those line items in the packet. It also includes another priority that y'all have mentioned to me a few times, which is that citizen reporting tool.
I was just about to say that.
Well, go ahead. But I know I'm excited about that. I'm certain y'all are as well.
No, I know I am. Let me just speak for me, because I was like, ooh, because I mean, too many times we have been urging the creation of for us to find an opportunity to have a tool that would allow our citizens to be empowered and do their part and own their responsibility for their community. And this is exactly what we've been talking about. So I too am excited about seeing this entered into our budget and as a priority, because we can't expect people to be responsible when they don't really have a means to be. And so this is a great opportunity for everybody to kind of take Waco up on its shoulders and keep it the best that it is. So thank you.
This is Holmes. Paul, great presentation, and I appreciate everybody's efforts in looking for ways to trim expenses. And $1.5 million is a big number. I mean, that's fantastic. I need to better understand context. Is that $1.5 million in the general fund budget for 2021? I'm trying to figure, the $1.5 million fits where? Or is that just expenses we found over the course of time? But how does that trim our 2021 budget?
It was spread out across, I think 18 or 19 GLs across multiple departments. And we used kind of a 3-year average and kind of saw where we might have been a little bit over budget, and talked with the departments, got a real understanding of right sizing their budget. And the departments were great and really took on that challenge to right size their budget. Real good team effort.
And so our expense normally for the 2021 budget was, what is it, 60, 70 million, somewhere in there, right? I mean, so this is, I know we're putting things back on, but our starting point was what? And $1 million, it's good to understand.
This represents about a 1% cut. Our total budget in the general fund is, I believe, $154 million.
Okay, the total. All right.
Yep. Yeah, so this was a 1% cut across the relative to the adopted budget.
Okay, yeah, I was thinking of the subset of that, but the 150 is the total. Okay, thank you for that. Was there anything critical in there? I mean, I like how you have it broken out: maintenance, other, purchase services, property services, supplies, and it doesn't look like we're hitting any one of that $1.5 million that it's sacrificing anything material or critical, maybe I should say. But no, I appreciate folks going through and just doing the sanity check, and really, that's coming out of folks' budget, so that's some pain was incurred there, I'm sure. But yeah, so we're taking the $1.5 million and then reappropriating. What are the totals there again? The 200 is left over as a reduction in the budget.
In the general fund, it would be, just trying to do some quick math here, reduced by 1.5 and then appropriate approximately 1.5 or so, but that is offset by about 300,000 or so from other funds, as well as the 100,000 from our partners at the county.
Okay, so I was thinking. All right, thanks a lot, Paul.
Yes, sir.
Sorry, one real quick follow-up question. So is this 1.5 that we're saving, is this all the money that's going to pay for the raises that incentivized everybody to tighten their belts, or is that separate?
This is this was like a component to pay for that. I want to say the total impact in the general fund is about 1.3 million for the raises. So by reducing the budget down, we could pay for that portion of it. We also, as part of our overall budget, wanted to look at, based off of vacancies and some salary savings. When we net that all out, do we have appropriate levels of appropriation now? And the answer is yes. So in our existing salaries, we had enough appropriation to pay for it. And we were able to tighten our belts in the operation side to do some of these items.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Paul? Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
And next, we will go to a discussion of our HVAC roof and vehicle replacement strategy.
Sorry, Mayor, we'll actually have Janice give part B of part one.
Apologies.
If you don't mind.
Nope, that's great. Thanks, Paul.
Sorry, sir. Janice?
Thank you, sir. I'm actually going to talk about the fund balances for general fund. I know we've talked about them quite a bit, and would just like to go back through and look at things after we had closed the year, and also talk about some showing you the potential amendments that we're going to be doing for some of the assignment balances. Again, we're going to focus primarily on the assigned fund balance and the unassigned, but we will show you a picture of the total general fund balance, and also projection out into the future on how those different components of the fund balance are going to look. Of course, one of our top ones is our capital improvements. We closed the year with an assignment that was approved by council of about 12.9 million. A large part of that is the transfer, and as Paul mentioned, we are proposing to do a budget amendment to actually transfer those funds to a capital special projects reserve fund in our first quarter amendment of almost 8.3 million. When we talked to you in December, we only had about 7 million in that assignment, and we were able to book the additional CARES money that brought it up to 8.2. With this money that we're proposing to do the amendment for, plus the 3 million that was in the budget appropriated for 21, that's part of the subsequent year appropriation assignment, that will bring our total to that fund of almost 11.4 million. And we're going to be discussing with you for some potential uses for that money, some critical needs for the city. You can see another important component of the capital improvements is the transfer to unassigned fund balance. And we'll be showing you a spreadsheet in a little bit that will actually show you the impact of that on our unassigned fund balance. Again, our economic development, a big component of that is Riverfront. And in this, you'll see some planned amendments for 21, as well as some planned amendments for 22 and 23. And then you'll see that by the end of that, we're planning to not have any more assignments for ED if the timing on everything goes as planned. The unassigned fund balance, again, the council approved a change to our financial management policies to change that to 28% of current year budgeted revenues. We closed the year in a stronger position than that at 33%. And again, our fiscal year 21 budgeted revenues were lower than they had been for 20, primarily because of reduction in sales tax, as we were being very conservative in that revenue projection. And this is actually looking at just how we anticipate general fund will look in future years. You will see in 20, you'll see the assignment that we're proposing to move. You'll see the capital. And with the information that we showed you, you will see that we do not anticipate having capital improvement assignments in the future. As we talked about for ED, we show that gradually going down, and again, 22 being the last year that we would have that assignment. We've left the non-spendable and the restricted at pretty standard amount. The committed, which is a large portion of our fund balance, which is WEDMAC money. We closed the year with about 14.5 million. We do have projects that have either been approved or being considered that would utilize that money. But in our projections, we've included additional funding of about 2.75 million going into that fund. And you can see that that allows us to have a balance that's going to remain in that to be used for future projects that aren't on the drawing board yet. We also have our fiscal year drawdown. That's the place that I mentioned that we have the transfer for the capital reserve fund. Our encumbrance, we left it a pretty standard amount just for this. And you can see the impact of adding that 2 million to our unassigned from the capital improvements, bringing it up to 50 million. We've got a growth in our revenues, and that's really something we have to look at as we're looking at that percentage, is our revenues are going to grow. As I said, our 21 revenues, these actually, as you can see, are next fiscal year revenues. This is really our budget for 21, and you can see it dropped substantially from 19, making a smaller amount for us to calculate that on. In the future, we've gone back to just a very small increase compared to really our 20 budget of 148 million. And we've got about 1.3%, 0.03% growth in there. And you can see with that, we stay at 33 because we've added a 2 million, and we gradually start coming down all the way down to what is the Moody's percentage of the 30% in 24. And you can see that in this chart really well. You can see this is the line for the Moody's 30%. You can see even though we're above that line, as our revenues grow and with no addition to unassigned, you're going to see we're going to be back down just at that level at the end of fiscal year 24. And again, this is showing all the other components that were on the previous chart. And you can sort of see the total as a percent of revenue and how that looks. And you can see our assignments growing down, as well as our total fund balance showing a large drop as we move those assignments down and spend down some of the WEDMEC money. The last chart is just showing a comparison of unassigned fund balances to other comparable cities. This is based on the 2019 actual numbers for their audits, but you can see how they look as far as unassigned fund balance, how they compare with expenditures, and an average and a median on how we compare to other cities. And I'll be glad to answer any questions. Just as an example, if we had picked up the City of Waco 2019 CAFR, our general fund, and this was before we had the change in our policy at 19, our unassigned as a percent of total would have been about 35%. And our total general fund balance as percent of expenditures would have been about 66. And our total general fund balance as percentage of revenue would have been about 58%. But again, that's based on 2019 and numbers before we changed our policies and added that additional amount to unassigned. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Hey, Janice, thank you again for the presentation. Just one quick question, and I don't know if this would go to you or City Manager Ford, but I was looking at the contribution of the City of WEDMEC to WEDMEC, 2.75 million.
Yes.
Do we think that is sufficient, for lack of better words? Go ahead.
Well, definitely. I know there are many projects that could utilize it. We normally look at that each year to see what we can afford in our budget and also what the county is planning to contribute, because we've normally tried to contribute an equal amount into that fund. And for purposes of this illustration, we left it at the current contribution rate that we have in our 21 budget, which is the $2,750,000.
There could be an opportunity down the road to, of course, if the county matches it, that we could increase that contribution.
Absolutely. And historically, we have been adding about 250,000 to our contribution each year. But again, it's something that is carefully looked at and discussed with the council in connection with all the other budgetary needs, and also just also dependent on what the county is planning to budget for their contribution to.
Mayor Pro Tem, I would say, we're planning to have a retreat on, I believe, April 13th. And one of the topics is going to be budget priorities. And I would suspect that'll be an area where we have some conversation about what's the direction and what's the appetite for funding level on WEDMEC.
Wonderful. And it's just, while it's exciting to see all of the new projects that are coming into Waco, I want to make sure that we are sustainable as well. And so just, I'm glad that we're having that discussion in April. So thank you for that.
Yes, and as I mentioned, really there are projects that have been committed to and are also being considered that would utilize all the money that the city currently has committed to WEDMEC.
So Janice, this is Kelly. Along those similar lines, will we, between now and when we have this economic development retreat in April, will we be voting on whether or not we want this addition of the 2.75 million to WEDMEC, or what will that process look like?
At this point in time, the money is in the 21 budget as a transfer from general fund. And so those discussions would really be affecting your future budgets as a part of that discussion.
Okay, perfect. And then I have a couple of other questions for you. Being still very new in this role, I was surprised to see Prosper Waco's having a budget line in the economic development category. Can you speak to why that is located in this budget category?
Yes, this actually developed in prior years when we had a budget amount for Prosper Waco and it wasn't utilized, and the request was made to carry that forward in assignments for future utilization for projects. And so it really goes back to several years ago when all the budgeted funds that have been planned for Prosper Waco were not utilized.
Okay, I'm halfway tracking. So with that, does that mean that Prosper Waco is still going to find some creative way to use those funds, or what does that mean now going forward with Prosper Waco there?
That's a great, let me jump. I think that's a great question, Councilmember Palmer, and we probably need to examine that, Bradley, because there's been a lot of changes both with this council and even Prosper Waco itself. I don't know if you have an update, Bradley or Paul, with Prosper Waco's plans for these dollars. But I recall the historical context of that, but we probably need to kind of get a refresher on what our plans are for these dollars, because it's not insubstantial.
Okay,
and I think that it might be helpful, Kelly or Bradley. Maybe you can get us some greater historical context. Janice said it as well as I did. I think that we just set some money aside for some projects, anticipating that as Prosper Waco saw needs, we could kind of put some money over into those projects. But that was years ago, and I don't know if the new leadership is even aware that these dollars are here. Do y'all know?
They are aware.
Okay.
And I know Deputy City Manager Emerson, occasionally we have conversations with Prosper Waco about how these funds can be accessed and utilized to further the community's goals. I'd be glad to have us respond with a more formal kind of a history, and also any upcoming uses that might be contemplated.
Okay, maybe I'm not sure if this is one of the components we're going to address in April at the retreat, but in having some conversations with Prosper Waco, it sounds like one of the workforce development needs we have in our community is having stipends available to students or available to our residents as they're going through some of these upskilling programs that we're building out. So maybe this is a possibility that we could consider for a full or partial funding source for that.
Okay.
My other question, Janice, is with the policy that we've committed to of the 28% for unassigned, can you talk to me a little bit about the need for the slow progression from the 34% down to 30, as opposed to just saying in future fiscal years we want that percentage to be right at 28?
I can tell you that fund balance is a critical component for us to not only for our bond rating. And so in just having that additional cushion, it allows us some more flexibility. Again, a big part of us being able to be back up at 33% is actually transferring that 2 million from assignments for capital. And that's something the council could direct us that they would prefer to use that in another way. You know, again, it's just an intended use. It's not, it would actually have to happen. But what we're trying to really illustrate here too, that we all remember, is that we anticipate our revenue growing. We anticipate with economic development, we'll have more sales tax, more property tax, additional fees. And with that, the amount that it will take to reach that 30% level is going to be higher. And so therefore, to take some pressure off that, we have a little bit of cushion now, and we're showing in this illustration with adding the 2 million, it allows us to move forward and be able to still meet the 30% that we're working to try to meet for just the Moody's requirement.
Okay.
Looking at fund balance. And you can tell too, I think one thing we also need to consider is our total fund balance is dropping. We're going from 92 million, and you can see the large drops as we move away from assignments and really put more emphasis on that unassigned balance. So I think it's critical that we have that cushion there to just help us maintain a strong fund balance.
Okay, that makes sense. I wonder in a year like 2021, because of the incredible work of your leadership, Janice, and just the larger city staff, the fact that we have this kind of flexibility in a crisis is phenomenal on one hand. And then on the other hand, I'm like, well, if there was ever a year to maybe not have so much cushion because our needs are so great, I could see an argument along having a smaller cushion as we meet greater community needs. Right.
It is a balancing act that really you have to look at as each budget is prepared and what the needs are. Because at this point, we don't have anything planned for these fiscal year drawdowns, and those have been important components of our budget. You can tell 4.4 million and almost 8 million. So that's another thing too that we'll have to factor in as we look. It's just balancing out all the needs with available resources.
This is Holmes, and my question was just spot on with what Kelly just observed on the absorption of that 48 million and the 33%. And really, our target is 28 or 30, I guess, as far as ratings. But yeah, and I'll just echo what Kelly just said, because I had the same concern. Mine maybe was more tax relief, but some of the community need for that 33%. A community need or tax relief or something else, because in future budgets we're not essentially we're carrying a 33% reserve this year, not a 28%, which is our kind of our stated goal. So I just want to be thoughtful about how we what we do with that excess, and really just to echo what Kelly said, there are probably other needs right now, particularly in this extraordinary conditions we've had with COVID and the freeze and the aftermath of both of those. Maybe we talk about that I don't know if that's on the agenda for the April, for the offsite, but I think we do need to be thoughtful about that excess, because it's, how much is that? 48 million at 33% going down to 28 is what? I haven't done the math.
7.3 million above the 28% goal right now.
Yeah, 7. Okay.
And that would, it's about 3.3 million-ish above the 30% goal, or 28% goal in fiscal year 24.
Right. But again, and Kelly hit this spot on, I thought, that we'll pick that up in in the 2024 budget, right?
Yeah, we sure can. I think the other thing to keep in mind too is sometimes when you have really high growth in your revenues, you can have the challenge of having to adopt a surplus budget and that additional revenue having to go into fund balance in order for you to meet your reserves. So I think as we go through each budget year, that's something we'll want to think about seriously and look at as we move forward, just to make sure that we're not getting in a position where we have to adopt a tax rate just to fund our fund balance to the appropriate level. So that's the trade-off. You have to find that balance in there for sure.
Right. And again, just want to emphasize this growth is very, very, very conservative, slightly over 1% compared to the 20 budget. So it is a very, very conservative growth for that revenue.
Got it.
And hopefully we'll see, much more robust growth, but just for this illustration, it's a very conservative.
Understood. Thanks, Janice.
Thank you. If there are no more questions, I'll stop sharing. I'm going to turn it over to Kelly Holacek, and she's going to go into definitely some items that we really could utilize some of the capital replacement funding for. Thank you.
Thanks, Janice. Hey, Kelly.
Hello, I am pulling up my screen. Everybody good on that?
Looks
Okay.
good.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of council. I'm Kelly Holacek, Director of General Services, and I'm going to be presenting to you today to describe our inventory of and the replacement contribution annually for heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems, roofs, as well as vehicles. Today, we'll be discussing how these replacements are funded, the replacement needs that we've identified as critical, the development of replacement plans, and how we propose to move forward and implement those plans. HVAC and roof replacements are typically funded out of operating cash, and that's subject to available funding. And then debt funding is used for larger projects. And I'd give you an example of the $1.175 million HVAC replacement at the convention center that you might recall. Vehicles are replaced using operating cash, interest earnings. And again, those replacements are subject to available funding. So as our city buildings and our vehicles continue to age and outdated equipment becomes less reliable and more difficult to repair as outdated replacement parts become harder to find, we end up patching roofs instead of replacing them, trying to depend on vehicles and HVAC units that we're limping along to keep in service. And if not replaced, these assets eventually fail completely and we're forced to be in a reactive position while experiencing possible safety concerns, as well as incurring the costs of emergency replacements, rental equipment, etc., to get us through those situations. Employee morale is affected when there's no heat or air conditioning in a building for a period of time, or when the equipment that they needed to perform a job is no longer available. So where do we start and what are our immediate needs right now? Well, we utilize 474 HVAC units of various tonnages to accommodate over 1.1 million square footage of temperature controlled space. And that's a combined tonnage of over 5,223 tons. 15% of our HVAC inventory has already exceeded its 15-year life expectancy. 42% of units are nearing their end of life. And we also have over 130 units that run on the R22 refrigerant, which is being phased out. And the newer the unit, the more efficient and eco-friendly the compatible refrigerant will be. Age and the R22 refrigerants are the two driving priorities for HVAC replacements. All units that run on R22 need to be replaced regardless of their age, and any units that are 15 years old or more need to be replaced regardless of their refrigerant. So the estimated cost of these critical replacements is just a little over $3.1 million. 42% of those units are servicing general fund departments, and the remainder consists of utilities and other enterprise fund departments. So next we'll move on to roofs. Our 1.1 million plus square footage of roof inventory is comprised of 5 different types of roofing. 30% of our roofs are built-up roofs, or what you would know as tar and gravel or asphalt-based roofs, followed by a TPO PVC roofing system, which is our preferred roof. It's less costly, it's more energy efficient, and it's considered more eco-friendly than those built-up roofs. And the last 3 types you see there are metal roofs or shingle roofs. This is a list of the different roof types broken down by the percentage reached of its expected life. Focusing first on the brown column on the far right, nearly half of our roof have reached at least 75% of their life expectancy. So that's well over half of our built-up roofs, and that's 83% of the corrugated metal roofs, and we're really close to encompassing all of our shingled roofs. Out of the 47% of the roofs that have reached 75% or more of their expected life, 17% have already met or exceeded 100% of life expectancy, and that's represented in that pink column. Any roof that has reached at least 75% of useful life is critically in need of replacement. Priority would go to those that have met or exceeded 100% of useful life, which is estimated to cost a little more than $1.5 million. The estimated cost to replace all roofs that have met or exceeded 75% would cost close to $4.95 million. And the general fund represents approximately $2.87 million of that, with the remainder coming from enterprise funds. So let's transition now over to vehicles. When you break down our inventory of vehicles by department, you see that 24% of the fleet belongs to the police department, and that's the blue slice on the top left. And then we go counterclockwise by percentage, largest to smallest, with 17% of inventory belonging to utilities, and then solid waste along with parks and recreation representing 11% each. And then the numbers continue to go down from there. The city's fleet software program, which is called FASTER, rates vehicles on a points system based on age, mileage, and maintenance costs. The point system maxes out at 15 points, which then flags the vehicle in need of replacement. Out of 675 vehicles in our fleet, 24.6% are at 15 points. So that's 166 vehicles. 27.9% are under 5 points, and the remaining 321 vehicles fall somewhere in between. Sorry. We've taken that list of 166 vehicles that have reached 15 points, and we've broken them down by vehicle type. 62 vehicles are currently pickups. That represents a little over 37% of the fleet. 43 are heavy-duty vehicles, approximately 25% of our fleet, and 28 vehicles are sedans, and that represents just under 17% of the fleet. And then the category numbers go down from there, as you can see. Using that same list of vehicles that have reached 15 points and breaking them down by funding, the total replacement value is a little over $9.2 million. And the general fund represents approximately $2.69 million of that. When we combine all of the critical needs comprised of first the HVAC units that have reached more than 15 years old and units that run on R22, and number 2, roofs that have reached 75% or more of useful life, and third, vehicles that have reached the maximum 15-point replacement criteria, the total funding needed is approximately $17.3 million. Out of that, the contribution needed from the general fund is approximately $6.9 million. So next we'll discuss replacement plans and their importance to the management of these assets. When it comes to asset management, as discussed earlier, the typical practice is to replace less expensive assets with any available funds we can find, or to amortize more expensive asset replacement via a debt sale or a long-term capital lease. One way to account for the replacement of less expensive assets that don't make sense for long-term debt financing is through an operating budget replacement plan. These work by budgeting for the replacement in an operating fund and then transferring those funds over to a replacement fund. The money's kept in the replacement fund until the asset needs to be replaced, typically at its end of useful life. The amounts in the operating budget are calculations that take into account the asset's replacement cost, its future salvage value, if there is any, and any interest earned on the cumulative transfers to the replacement fund. These amounts are divided by the expected life of the asset to yield the annual replacement contribution. The actual replacement of the asset is based on replacement criteria for that asset. If the asset hasn't met the criteria, the money stays in the fund until it does. Typical criteria include age, maintenance expenses, energy efficiency, regulatory changes, etc. So what are the benefits of having a replacement plan? You have lower repair costs, emergency repairs are all but eliminated, less need to rent something to replace what's out of service, safety is often improved, customer response is assured, and the city's image is improved, and employee morale and pride in their work is improved. The plans can be expensive to the operating budget, so often a phased implementation approach is used. A phased approach often focuses on the most critical assets first. For vehicles, a replacement plan also includes another important element, and that is right sizing. The overall fleet's examined to ensure the vehicle is justified by demonstrated need. With the workforce becoming more mobile and technologically driven, and job sharing and telecommuting growing, the impacts of these changes on the fleet must be examined. It's also important that the plan make sure we have the right vehicle for the right job. So while not every city job warrants a 4x4, 3/4 crew cab Chevrolet truck, also not every job warrants a compact car. So matching up the right car to the right job is a critical element of vehicle replacement plan. Another critical element of a vehicle replacement program would be the utilization of electric vehicles. Certainly, there are policy reasons for doing so. Reduction of emissions that contribute to formulation of greenhouse gases is important in both the short term and the long term. For the short term, increased air pollution could push Waco into a non-attainment status that affects things from vehicle inspections to construction to manufacturing. And long term, avoiding negative impacts to our climate are critical to our sustainability. There are a number of important elements to consider in electrification of the fleet. Identifying the best candidates in the fleet for EVs involves some of the right vehicle, right job analysis we discussed just a moment ago. And certainly there are business decisions to be made where life cycle cost analysis and return on investment calculations are needed. And it's also important that our purchasing policies and practices are open to the market and welcome the market's involvement in our process. Issuing formal requests for bids or RFBs and recommending awards based on the best value to the city instead of utilizing purchasing cooperatives opens that window for market involvement. As we issue RFBs, in addition to public advertisements, we would reach out directly to EV contacts, notifying them of the solicitation, and we would reach out to them each and every time one of these RFBs is issued, because we want to know when we have an opportunity to incorporate EV into our fleet. Paying for EV replacement, like all vehicle replacement, requires a careful comparison of funding approaches. While there are some incentives such as grants available for EV fleets, it's important to know which are available to municipalities and their direct costs and indirect costs. And finally, EVs require a new system of infrastructure support, namely charging locations. Providing charging locations that are accessible and available when needed are vitally important to our operations, and understanding the cost of this infrastructure and which type of systems to use are also important elements of an electrification plan. So let's talk now about implementation. How are we going to create these plans? Money is obviously a key factor in moving forward successfully. Earlier in the presentation, staff presented some critical needs. These are assets that, based on our analysis and methodology, are in need of replacement right now. Item 3 on today's agenda will explore the uses of the Capital Special Project Fund that's been created. As those replacement plans are finalized, there will be a need for money to implement them. Staff suggests some portion of these funds be reserved for asset replacements. And rather than discuss this at this moment in the presentation, staff suggests this discussion be had in a few minutes under item 3 on today's agenda, so this use can be discussed with other possible uses of these funds. We know the plan will require money, but developing the plan requires other elements that are equally important, elements such as available time, analytical tools, subject matter expertise, and experience with best practices in other cities. There are a number of skilled, experienced consultants who specialize in these fields, and staff recommends putting them to work for Waco. With regard to our fleet, we'd look to them to compile a complete inventory, take a look at our replacement criteria and methods, and recommend areas for right sizing, incorporate this into a plan that addresses immediate needs and addresses future replacements. We'd also look to them to give us the best practices for funding that plan. Electrification of the fleet would be a foundational part of the replacement plan. So regarding HVAC, a similar approach would be taken, but obviously tailored to HVAC operations. It would look at energy efficiency, environmental impacts, current and planned regulations affecting refrigerant uses. We also want to make sure we have the right equipment for the right facilities. Finally, like all other assets, our roof replacement plan would include similar elements from a full evaluation of our inventory, how we go about deciding their replacement criteria, and the environmental benefits. As mentioned, when it comes to implementation, utilizing outside consultants is the best way to move forward. These consultant specialists in their fields can apply resources to the development of these plans that the current staff cannot due to the need to carry out daily operations. These specialists bring to the table the analytical tools that are proven practices that will be of immense value to the city of Waco. With your consent, staff will bring forward for council's approval contracts with these specialists to produce these much needed plans. So Mayor and Council, this concludes my presentation, and staff would be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Thanks, Kelly. Any questions?
Yes, Mayor, I've got one real quick. This sounds like a great idea in developing a plan here. I wanted to ask about leasing versus purchasing vehicles. I realize some vehicles are specialty vehicles and don't lend themselves to leasing, but I know a lot of large purchasers, when it comes to kind of standard vehicles, are moving towards the consistency in cost that leases afford as opposed to purchase. I didn't know how the city's view of that, or whether we've tried that in the past or not.
Councilmember Boardroom, that's a great question. This year, we did actually approve some leasing arrangements for our fire department fleet. As you mentioned, large pieces of equipment that are very expensive. And that's something I think we need to continue to look at. I know the city of Dallas and city of San Antonio both have a very active capital leasing program for their vehicles. And that's something that we would look to with our consultants as strategies for doing that. And I expect you would see a hybrid. There's sometimes where a capital lease might make sense, or maybe a short-term bond might make sense versus just a cash payment kind of thing. So that's a great point, and it would be an integral part of our replacement program.
I'm glad to hear that. I know that it can take some of the unexpected costs out of repair and replacement, but on the other hand, it may be more expensive on the front end. So thank you for considering that. I appreciate it.
Sir.
Kelly, this is Kelly.
Hi, Kelly.
I really appreciated this presentation, particularly the slide that was talking about the environmental impact. In one of my grad school classes, we talked about the green economy. And as we make decisions for institutions or governments looking at what is both the human impact, what is the environmental impact, what's the fiscal impact. So I appreciate the nuance and the level of thoughtfulness and just thought behind this, looking at how does this affect our climate? How does this affect our air quality? How are we good stewards of both our environment and our resources? So just wanted to applaud that, and also really appreciate this idea of the right vehicle, right job, or right seat, right fleet, and figuring out who is, what are the actual needs that we have, recognizing that we obviously can't have a sedan doing the role of a fire truck, but where can we downsize whenever possible? So just think this move is really important, and I think this will be really well received by constituents. I have had a number of emails and groups reach out wanting to see how we can help the city move in this kind of a direction. So this is encouraging, and love the idea of us bringing on some specialists and consultants to help speak into some of these pieces. I would love, and maybe this is can be something we think about in 2022, but would love for us to have some really clearly defined objectives and goals for this is what we're committed to by 2025. This is what we're committed to as a city by 2030. So we have some very specific accountability checkpoints that we can try to move in the direction of over the next several years.
Thank you, Councilmember Palmer.
This is Holmes. Kelly, thanks for the report. Great job. I like how you bring things into what is our inventory? What are the metrics? It's easier for, I think, council to understand, here are the numbers. It's 1 million square foot of HVAC. It's whatever roofs, 675 vehicles. It makes it easier for us to get context. And I like the replacement sort of projecting a plan. It's more proactive than reactive. And hey, this broke down. Why did it break down? But I like the analysis of, how do we think it's going to age and age off the rolling stock. So we're saying, and I guess ultimately what we're going to do a consultant and have that consultant maybe make some recommendations on this. And I'll ask what the cost of that will be later. But the basic study, we're saying that 17.2, at least the preliminary work that you've done, Kelly, the 17.2 is if that would just bring things up to snuff now. That's not, that would be generally what we think is an annual cost, or is that just if we were to get everything up to speed on what we think the 17.2 million is the number that we would be looking at, 6.9 out of the general fund.
That's our current snapshot right now. You're correct. Yeah. And then as we move forward and maintenance costs accumulate and things age, really it would, I guess, year to year trigger on those maintenance costs and mileage.
Sure. I guess we'll get from the consultant if it's 6.9 coming out of general fund, like snapshot now, has that been what it's sort of looked like every year? Or are we just in an extraordinary point right now where these items, the HVAC roofs and vehicles are wearing out? Again, I'll wait for the consultant report on that. But again, Kelly, thanks for bringing this into focus. And again, I'd rather be proactive than reactive. I think we can be more efficient that way. So good job.
Thank you.
Councilmember Holmes, to piggyback on that, to your question, one of the goals of management is to really create an equipment replacement program that doesn't have these big jumps year to year and allows us to plan for regular amounts of expenditures, on a multi-year basis. So one year we're not spending 7 million and the next we're spending 500,000. Instead, the line is much more regular and can be anticipated and budgeted for more appropriately. So that's, in each one of these strategies, that's kind of where we're aiming, and that way we can just be more thoughtful about the budget process and move forward in that way.
I agree 100%. Thanks, City Manager.
Hi, Kelly, it's Andrea. Thank you again for this presentation. I do have some tag-on questions from some of the comments made by Councilmember Borderoot and Palmer. Beginning with, I totally agree with the right job, right vehicle idea and theory, because I think that it is a way, if we are going to advance towards increasing our EV fleet or whatever, we can really look at where, we could get the most bang out of our buck from our electric vehicles and, do comparative analysis of, as the work world as we know it is changing, where we can fully utilize our electric vehicles without some of the concerns that have been raised about our high usage cars and the amount of charging stations that we have currently at all. So I really appreciate the fact that there'll be a consultant to break that down. I serve on the Energy, Environment, and Natural Resources Committee for the National League of Cities, and we met yesterday, and I was like, well, this is apropos and timely, and wanted to make sure that you know and utilize the NLC resources specifically in that committee to assist in best practices of other cities. You know, you can really get an analysis of what we say peer cities, but I'm always stepping up because, you know, we're far from average. So the step above what those cities are doing and how they're breaking down the fleets, especially the EV fleets. I think it is imperative for us to really look at what our next step is in this part of our community resilience. You know, I know that we have been having robust discussions about sustainability and what that means for Waco. But I think that to Councilmember Palmer's point, I know it's difficult to do hard lines. I mean, I know people are really digging heels in, well, we need to do this by this date. And while I agree that there needs to at least be a plan, I think if we have the information like this with intentional directions like this, you know, what happens if we phase parks to these particular types of vehicles, or what happens if, you know, this needs this, you know, I think it'll give us more directions, and then you can set those kinds of goals so that we do have something to look at and compare to and understand where the growth will come and where it won't. I also agree with Councilmember Borderud in the fact that, and I appreciate Paul for bringing it back to our remembrance about the leasing of our fire trucks. And I'm like, if you can lease a fire truck, we can lease a Focus. You know what I mean? So it's something that I know that there's got to be some balance in better practices and best practices of what and why we do things. So I look forward to what you bring us back. Please note that in you know, however I can connect or be of any assistance with those NLC staff members, because that is their whole job. The federal advocacy on environmental justice and energy and natural resources is their whole job. So whatever it is that you need, please make sure you let us know so we can get that to you.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Bearfield.
Great comments and
Hey,
questions, feedback. Sorry, keep going.
Just one more quick question for you. First of all, I am in favor of getting the specialists and consultants to come and give us a plan. We've spent quite a lot of time speaking on vehicles, but I was also wondering the possibility as they are working their plan when it comes to roofs, having solar panels, what that would look like, you know, price difference, just exploring the possibility and the idea, you know, while we're already doing the work. I would definitely love to see what that might entail. I know council has had conversations in the past about it. And so I think now would be an opportune time to really just really discover and really see what that cost would be. Now, I understand that sometimes it would be ridiculously more expensive, but I still would, to make a sound decision, I would like those comparing numbers. So thank you for that again.
I'll make note of that. Thank you, Councilmember.
Great comments and questions. Any other questions for Kelly? All right. Thank you so much, Kelly.
Thank you.
And I believe we'll move on to our final item, which is a discussion for the use and capital special projects reserve funds. And Mr. Kane is going to lead out on that.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mayor and Council. And I'm going to try to share screen with you here. Usually something goes wrong when I try to do this. So bear with me here.
Welcome to my world.
All right. So this is just a real short presentation. You've heard some great information from staff this afternoon, and not really going to talk a whole lot more from staff's perspective, other than just to give you some thoughts on this capital projects reserve fund. We've talked about it a lot in previous meetings as well as today, and you know, we want to make sure that the council understands just kind of some parameters that we would suggest from staff's perspective. First of all, this fund can be used at council's pleasure. I say that in the sense that there are no unique legal restrictions that you might see on perhaps bond funds or grant funds or something like that, that these are, there's nothing unique about them, and it's council's pleasure in terms of how they're spent. With that said, there are some recommendations that staff would give to the council with regard to using these funds. First, we would recommend that they be only used for one-time non-recurring expenses, such as capital items, developer participation or support, perhaps startup funding for some initiatives that council might have. Main thing here, I think, is to avoid any kind of recurring expenses that, such as salaries, employees. You don't want to use these funds for those. Those are things that should be put into the operating budget moving forward. So we've shown here in the numbers at the top, Janice alluded to them earlier. We have a couple of contributions that would be coming over to total that $11.5 million. And then we've listed just some, and these are possible uses. These are just ideas to start conversation at your level. We talked about, Kelly did a good job of presenting that information on our assets here, our roofs, air conditioning, and vehicles. We anticipate that WebMec will respond and grow, obviously, from that $2.75 million from the city and the county in the future, but that might be another area, particularly this year, that you might want to earmark some dollars for. Another item that's come up in the past has been a downtown strategic action plan, and that can include a number of things, everything from streetscape to parking to transportation to marketing. All of that can be a part of a downtown strategic action plan. And, as you know, we own quite a bit of property in downtown, so we may want to start thinking about, where does vertical parking come into play in the future of downtown Waco? So that's another item that's been discussed at previous meetings. We try to build a contingency in each one of our CIP projects, but as council is well aware, the market can change quickly in terms of construction contracts. So perhaps you might want to set aside some dollar amount for contingency just to complete that CIP. We plugged in a number of 5% here on that 30 million, just to give you some idea. Another thing that was very successful during the pandemic was the small business loan program. There's some discussion that's had about expanding that, possibly creating a revolving loan program. Lots of different ideas I know that are out there. So we just noted that here, and it's something that we'll look for council's direction as we explore that topic. And then last, and this one, it came up recently with regard to Snowmageddon, or whatever you want to call it, the storm that we had recently. There are some things, and ACM Holt is leading the effort there to do our after action report. And we expect there'll be a number of items come from that report that point towards investment in future preparedness. And all of us hope we'll never have that again, right? But we may. And there's other parts of emergency preparedness, even for storms that are typical in Texas in the spring, that we could be better prepared for. So there's going to be a need for some expenses, and this is a plug-in number at this point. We're just showing you a need more than a dollar amount here. So these are all things that that we have listed. I know that council perhaps has other initiatives that you'd like to bring to the table and ideas that you'd like to present today, and we can certainly follow up with those in April, as Bradley had mentioned earlier. So that's pretty much all I have here. Was just maybe to turn it over to you, Mayor, and council at this point, and just kind of discuss from y'all's perspective, what are some things that you'd like to see as possible uses for these dollars? You can see that we are already in the hole if we use these numbers here going forward. And that's not the point of this discussion. It's more to get ideas out on the table, talk about priorities, and then we'll develop a budget around those. So I'll quit sharing my screen at this point and turn it over to you, Mayor, for discussion.
Great.
And
Thanks,
see where
Paul.
we go from here.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate that. Discussion on this. Questions, thoughts, comments?
I mean, if these don't work out, I have plenty of one-time projects in District 2 that we could utilize this money from. Just saying.
Yeah.
No, this is a well thought out plan. I would love to explore some of these ideas, especially the emergency plan with the recent happenings in our city. One thing I know that some members have asked before, and I don't know if it's in the budget already, so I apologize. But the equity report that at one point we talked about doing within our city and organization.
We have set aside dollars for that potential in the economic development assignment. I believe there's about $550,000 set aside. We had tentatively programmed about 300 of it in the current year, and then 200 in the remaining year or the next year. That's obviously subject to council change as well, but we do have about $500,000 for equity related work in the assignments.
Paul, would that be for the availability study or the disparity study or both or something separate?
Both and. It could be for both of those or something different if council wishes.
I think it's a great question, Councilmember Palmer. I think there's some sequencing that Deputy City Manager wanted to approach there, starting with the availability study and then building out to the full disparity study. But definitely funds are available, as Paul mentioned, to support both of those moving forward. Deidre, you want to add anything there? I know you said you weren't going to talk, but I keep.
Well, Councilmember Bearfield came off mic, so.
Well, I mean, I was ensuring for the benefit of our new council members, studies aside, is that equity dollar amount separate and apart from the development of a equity director or some presence in the city manager's office? Because I just want to make sure that that's clear.
Yes, so that is, and City Manager Ford is shaking his nod in his head. Yeah, so that is separate and apart from that, and he's 100% correct. When we've initially had our initial discussions about a disparity study, there a lot of concern came about around, do we actually have the entities to actually fulfill that? What we don't want to do is start behind the curve. And so we really want to start off with doing an availability study and identify within our market who is available to do the work and respond to contracts and bids as those things come up. And if we need to develop plans in the meantime to grow that population, then we can do that. But again, it's true. We really want to start from availability to conduct an availability study and then move into a disparity study. So we have a comprehensive document and we know where we're going and we know what we have.
Yeah, I think that would, you're very right, Deputy City Manager Emerson, as you don't want to create a situation that you've worsened the problem, doing it in the wrong order. Assistant City Manager Kane, I do have one question. What is it that was on the list from last year that was yet undone?
Wow, that is a great question. And to properly answer you, I will have to do some work and get that list ready and get that distributed to you. But that's a great question.
Thank you. Because we dream big and in color. And so when we do things, it is full intention and no one prepared. No one put the little asterisk, there's going to be a multiple pandemics in the interim while we're planning big and in color. So I know some things totally got set apart. I mean, because again, as we talk about the additional work that our city management team has had to onboard from just by virtue of what we are going through. I know that we are woefully behind in our dreaming and planning, but as we prepare moving forward and we look to the things that we can do, I am excited about our emergency preparedness. I do not expect there to be a snowmobile parked in the convention center. I don't expect that, but I do think that there are things that we could do to prepare. I mean, we are still in the midst of Tornado Alley, and there are some better ways in communication that we can deal with our utility partners to prepare, perhaps communication efforts, standardized communication efforts with them and us as people. I'm not sure about this downtown strategies action plan. I'm like, how many downtown plans we gonna have?
Well, let me add.
I'm like, how many more do we need to do?
Yeah, let me add a little bit to that, and give some clarity. We do have a lot of plans. What we lack is the tactics
Actualization.
and the decision points of, okay, are we going to put streetscape on 4th Street and 5th Street when we go rebuild and do all the utilities? We don't want to make that decision right at the moment of bidding 4th and 5th Street. We want to have like a prioritization that aligns with our TIF funding and our funding mechanisms. And so it'll build off the plans that exist, but also give us more of a tactical approach that lets the council set a direction and aligns the TIF resources. And also, as Paul mentioned, we're sitting on like 8 or 9 acres of surface parking lots downtown. That's not the highest and best use. Let's get a strategy going for those that can accomplish a number of the council's priorities and objectives potentially. So it really, I think it's hard to create a set of 3 or 4 words that describe what we want to do there, but that gives you some better context.
It does. Thank you. Because I was like, I mean, sure, but what? There was a bit of hesitation there. So I appreciate that. But if you could, City Manager Kane, Assistant City Manager Kane, get me that list of what we didn't do, because I think that will allow us a better way to look and see if the things that we planned last year are still important right now, or have they moved? Has their priorities shifted in light of what we are our present condition? So that'll be helpful.
Great question, and I'll try to get those out to you here by the end of the week to the full council.
Councilmember Field, I just wanted to briefly say that the Waco Bank District, which Councilmember Holmes and I share, is gloriously and proudly without any strategic plan, and it hopes to stay so.
Okay, big money. Us in the core of the city. Paul, I really appreciate you and your team putting this list together. One of my questions is on that slide, I was having a hard time interpreting the proposed amounts. Were the proposed amounts you were offering us the category on the column on the left, or the column on the right?
The column on the left, the column on the right is kind of the rolling balance if you funded each one of those things on the left. Okay.
I think I hadn't even thought about the tornado piece. Dear Lord Jesus, protect us. But I think what Councilwoman Barefield said is a great thought. I love the idea of putting extra funds to the emergency plan. I think that would go a long way with our constituents to say, hey, we did the very best we could with what we had. These are all the great accomplishments. This is what we're doing going forward. And as a result, this is the extra however many hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars we're putting to better prepare ourselves for the future. I think that would be very well received in the midst of all of the crises we're facing right now. I also really love the small business loan program. In my perfect world, and we can talk about this in April, I would love to see a parallel program to what we have with WEDMEC at the city level of how are we doing economic incentives, whether it's through tax abatement or in loans or grants that we're giving to small, like Waco-owned businesses in similar ways. So this $1 million that you're earmarking feels like a really exciting space. And I think what we could do with $1 million for a small local business is just so drastic in the impact that would have on specific neighborhoods and on families and our community at large. So just want to wave my little flag there that I think that is phenomenal.
Thank you.
This is Holmes. Thanks, Paul, for putting this together and kind of throwing some suggestions together on directions we could go. I'm kind of like Hector, I got a lot of things at D5 that we could burn this off in like a week, but I don't want to lose the context either of, we have a good year. We have this kind of this 10, 11 million or this big number. When that happens in the private sector, you use it on capital projects or you dividend it back to the shareholders. So I want there to be maybe not in this year's budget or this segment of funds, but at least be thinking about tax relief, because I don't want to be taxing at least citizens in District 5 and tell them, hey, we got an extra 12 million every year. By the way, that's on your back. I just want to be thoughtful about how we do this. And if it puts us in a position for the 2022 budget to talk about tax relief, that's great. I'm like Councilmember Palmer on the Small Business Fund. I really like how that launched last summer, and I think we saw some good come out of that. And I'd like to see that somehow get a life of its own for Waco-based small businesses. I think that would really work. And then economic development in general, I think that's good from year to year. So those kind of jump out at me. The HVAC roofs and vehicle, I get that number. We just heard it in Kelly's report. But that will be refined, I would assume, through the consultant's work.
Yes, sir. And as we define our financing strategies for it, that will affect it as well.
Great. Yeah, I appreciate staff putting us in the position of having this segment of funds to review.
Thank you, Mr.
And
Holmes.
let me just say out loud, if, as we do this availability study, that may lead to how and where the small business grant program leads and is advanced. Because if we do not have the workforce there, that you have to say what you need. And as we advance and ask for the STEAM stuff, you went to the industry folks and said, what is it that you need your workforce to look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now? So if it's not there, then we build it, we grow it. And one of the conversations I was in yesterday was about and this is no offense to the people in public works, the aging nature of the folks in public works management and leadership, right? Who are the next people to take that job, working in water, working in utilities, where are those people? So I think that as we look at what we have and we take our inventory of what we have, then we can figure out what we need. And that then would spur out of all of the things, including our small business grant funds and, the ability to work with our local newly created CDFIs and funding opportunities in small business development organizations that are growing in Waco as we advance our entrepreneurial ecosystem. So I think that that's something that we have all the pieces, right? So it's just about getting them in the right order and getting them together and aligned so that Waco is the beneficiary.
And to piggyback on that a little bit, I don't think that, and I hope this doesn't come out wrong, I don't think it's the city's responsibility to do it all. We can really work with partners that are already doing the job, and it's the city's role to fund it. And we still get the benefit out of it as long as our constituency as well. But I do think that our staff, I think Councilmember Barefield said it earlier, that our staff has been terribly busy with everything that's been going on. And so I would hate to put more work on them when they're already stretched thin, but we do have the opportunity to fund it. I think we have some great partners here that, as Councilmember Barefield mentioned, the new CDFI, we have Startup Waco, the chambers, et cetera, that can do a lot of that work, and we still reap the benefit of it.
And Councilmember, we're going to use words like assist. We're not going to necessarily use the whole word fund. That means something else now. But we're going to say assist.
Agreed.
I was like, whoa, wait a minute. I was like, it's only 11 million. It can only go so far. But they're there. And so let's really just start working smarter and and we already do. We are a arm linking community and working with the entities and organizations that are already there. But, let's get it in order and start doing it.
I love going last. Is any other comments? I love going last. I love I don't know. Kyle and Malcolm always went last. So I love it because y'all hit all my notes. So I don't have to say anything. Just reemphasize what's been said. I think we're going to, in terms of economic development stuff, we're going to have a lot of great conversations in April. And I think regarding those allocations, just knowing what the complete plan is going to make funding decisions at least for me, more comfortable because we have a greater grasp on the breadth and the scope of where we're headed. But agree with what's been said about really making sure that we have an emphasis on small business. I'm excited about that downtown study. I hadn't even thought about that. So I like the clarification that Councilmember Bearfield and Bradley made in terms of making sure that we're building off of existing plans, because I do think that's important. But it is important to, I think this is a game of moving our whole city further down the field, bring neighborhoods further down the field, our downtown further down the field. And it's a balancing act, a juggling act of making sure we're putting the right emphasis on the right parts of the city, but we have to have a strong core. And we know from data and studies that we've got to keep moving the ball down the field in the downtown core, and there is available land there. And I'm excited to see kind of what that could look like fleshed out as well. So yeah, this is really exciting. I appreciate staff's work, and I won't say anything else because I think y'all said it all. I literally was just checking stuff off the list as y'all were hitting it. So thankful for everybody today. So with that, Paul or Bradley, anything else on that item?
Thank you for your time today. Really appreciate the direction and the insights. Thank you very much. Really helpful to us.
Great. Okay, if that's all for that one, we'll move on to our request for future agenda items and our next meeting date. So we do have a city council retreat scheduled for April 13th at 1:30, and then our next budget and audit committee meeting will be scheduled for Tuesday, May 11th at 1:30. Are there any requests for future agenda items? There being none, we would. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, a quick one.
No.
At our last budget and audit meeting, Mayor Pro Tem asked for us to look into Spanish language access, and I would just love is that something we're going to get an informal report about, or will we have an update on this at a future budget and audit meeting?
Yeah, I know progress has been made thanks to City Secretary's office. We can provide that via an informal report to the council pretty quick, I believe.
Awesome. Thanks, Bradley.
Sure.
Sorry, Dylan. Snuck right in there.
Got it in. Anybody else? All right, there being no further business, we'll adjourn at 3:01 today. Thanks, everybody.